Share screen, Microsoft Word, lesson 7. All right, welcome everybody. We're going to finish going over the curriculum here for the kashrut section of the curriculum. 2 classes today, 7 and 8. The 7th one here is on I gotta change this. Looks Ashkenazi. Gavinat in the Sephardic. Akum, non-Jewish cheese. Okay, so if you watch the 7th video in Yonatan Halevi's series, it's like an hour and a half, very thorough. It goes through so much information. You'll feel like an expert just in that hour and a half. Yeah, obviously we're going to give you the Cliff's notes. We're just trying to give you the important parts of it. But he goes through so much information, the different opinions, why they have those opinions, how they came to be, and there's some stuff in there too, really good stuff. I forget what they are. Like at the 48, 49 minute mark, he talks about one rabbi who introduced something new, and he wrote a halakhic sefer. He wasn't even a rabbi. It wasn't even his job. He was like a businessman. And he's writing books of halakha. So, and where is he ever called, mean names and rejected? But he's just a person who studied Torah, learned laws, and he's bringing new things. So I thought that was, and he's writing books. I thought that was one of the good things in there. But anyway, so after going through that hour and a half video where you'll feel like an expert in an hour and a half, then I went back and watched Chaim Avadia's 2 videos, and somehow it's part 1 and part 2. There's almost no such thing as non-kosher cheese. And it's 2 videos. One's like 11 minutes and one's 13 minutes. So 25 minutes of Chaim Avadia obviously is not as thorough as the hour and a half that Yonatan Halevi did, but he hit all the major points that you already learned from watching Yonatan Halevi's video. And then he even brought new stuff. You'll feel like a real expert after just going through those 2 things. So anyway, I feel extremely qualified, even though I can't remember all the names of all these people that they brought on this particular topic, which is probably the topic I care absolute least about, because the conclusion is at the end of it, basically what Chaim Avadia said. There's no reason to worry about any type of cheese. So it's pretty much just understanding that there are people that object to it. So why is that? It boils down to this is what their rabbi told them. And I'm pretty sure they've never watched Yonatan Halevi's video or Chaim Avadia's, and they're just clinging to their tradition without even understanding what's involved in it. So if you don't want to get bogged down with all those details, you don't need to worry about cheese. If you want to become an expert in 2 hours, just watching those 2 sources, you'll probably know more than 99% of every rabbi on the planet on this topic just from watching that. So anyway, it's in his series, so we included it in the curriculum. So we'll just go through it quickly here. Okay, the objective: to deeply understand the halakhic complexity surrounding the prohibition of cheese made by non-Jews, Gavinat Akum, and its application throughout history and modern times. To examine the reasons provided by rabbinic authorities prohibiting non-Jewish cheese and how these laws are practically applied today by various Jewish communities and kashrut agencies, the kosher mafia. To delve into this historical background, traditional laws, and contemporary discussions that influence the production and consumption of kosher cheese. All right, section 1. Historical background and halakhic foundations of Gavinat Akum. Understanding the prohibition. Okay, there's debate. I don't think it covers it in here. We know, as Rambamists, that Rambam brings down a Hilchot Mamrim. Once the Sanhedrin says something, that's it. That's the law. There's a way to overturn it, but you have to have a new Sanhedrin. It has to be greater in number and greater in wisdom. Otherwise, you can't overturn it. This creates a problem for the people who say that the rabbis today are like donkeys compared to the rabbis in the in the Talmud, because you lose wisdom every generation, you're further away from, the divine presence being there with us. So the Ravad disagrees with Rambam, and he says, well, if the prohibition was enacted for this reason, we'll call it X. Well, fast forward many generations, if X is no longer present, then we no longer need the prohibition. So the Ravad, who disagrees with Rambam, says, okay, we don't have to wait for a new Sanhedrin. We can overturn things if that reason is no longer there. Then there's people that disagree with the Ravad, and they say, well, it depends. If they gave us the reason, then that would be applicable. If they didn't tell us why they enacted the prohibition, then we don't know what the prohibition is. What was it enacted for? So therefore, we cannot overturn that one. So they would default back to Rambam. So with the cheese, why do we have the prohibition? I don't think this really makes it clear in this text, but when you watch the Yonatan Halevi and Chaim Avadias, they make it clear that we don't know. There's people that say, well, they used to have cheese where it was left out, and snakes would bite it, and they were venomous, so it could be poisoned. So we can't have that. All right, well, snakes are not an issue anymore. But there's other reasons, though, because and Chaim Avadia brings this up, that Yonatan Halevi leaves it out, that everything here is talking about the Babylonian Talmud, but Chaim Avadia brings up that the Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, which has a deceptive name because it was written in Yavna, but apparently there's a source there that says the reason that this is a concern is because the animals were used for idolatry. Okay, so if that's the case, then it doesn't matter if it's Halav Israel, if it's Halav Stam, if it's idolatrous, if this animal is slaughtered to an idolatrous pagan deity, that raises the standard. It is now off limits at every derivative. So if that's the case, the whole reason for the prohibition was because this cheese comes from animals that were slaughtered in idolatrous ways. Then it's off limits. Okay, well, then if that's not what's happening, cows are not being, you're not getting cheese from animals that were slaughtered to pagan deities today. So then we don't need to worry about it. That's according to the Jerusalem Talmud. Then comes the Babylonian Talmud and say, well, we don't know. Maybe it was because of that. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was because of the poisonous snakes. Maybe it was because it comes from Halav Stam instead of Halav Israel. Maybe it's a non-kosher ingredient getting in there. We're not able to supervise it. There's debates about the stomach of the cow, which is a kosher animal. Is it part of the cow? There's lots of different reasons. So just because the Babylonian Talmud doesn't know the reason for the prohibition doesn't mean the Jerusalem Talmud is wrong. So it's sort of a fascinating topic, and those two sources, they go into long discussions about it. You'll feel extremely educated on something that at the end of the day doesn't really matter if you come to the conclusion that me and Chaim Avadia come to, which is that you don't have to worry about the cheese, then you don't have to go down that rabbit hole. However, if you choose to, it's not like an unlimited amount of studying that you could do. 2 hours, your head will be just exploding with the information that's there. At least that's the experience that I had with it. Okay, so understanding the background and the halakhic foundations of it, understanding the prohibition. The prohibition against consuming cheese made by non-Jews, known as Gevinat Akum, has its roots in the Mishnah. The prohibition, but why was it prohibited? Not so clear. And it's further elaborated upon in the Talmud. And by Talmud, they mean the Gemara. The primary reason given is that non-Jews might use rennet derived from the stomach lining of non-kosher animals. That's one thing. If we're using, I don't know, pig milk, if it's used from a pig, that would be a problem. Pigs or improperly slaughtered cows, rendering the cheese non-kosher. So this improperly slaughtered cow, the cow is a kosher animal, but if the slaughter wasn't done right, that makes it a nevela. So all the meat and everything is still the same meat. regardless of how it was slaughtered. It's just that we can't obey the mitzvah, of eating it, but we can give it to like a non-Jew. So this would just make a nevela off limits for us, but it wouldn't make it, non-kosher, to be used for non-Jews. Okay, rendering the cheese non-kosher because it would have the status of a non-kosher animal like a pig or a nevela, which is off limits for us. Rennet and kashrut concerns. Rennet is the enzyme used in cheese making to curdle the milk. Traditionally, it comes from the stomach of an animal. If this animal is not slaughtered according to Jewish law, the rennet is not kosher, and any cheese produced with it becomes non-kosher. Historically, there were concerns about the mixing of non-kosher animal derivatives in the cheese-making process. Diverse reasons for the prohibition. This is because we don't have one clear reason why the prohibition was enacted. Various sages debated the reason behind this prohibition, with opinions ranging from concerns about using non-kosher ingredients to broader fears of social integration and idolatry. Rambam's rationale, which is usually what we go with, he attributes the prohibition to the use of rennet from improperly slaughtered animals, focusing on the halakhic impurity that arises when non-kosher substances transform the milk. This is going to be important. It's the transformation process. Concerns over idolatry. Some Rishonim, the early rabbinic authorities, argue that non-Jewish cheese might have been used for idolatrous purposes, adding a layer of spiritual impurity to the product. This is probably referencing what Chaim Ovadia mentions in the Jerusalem Talmud. Section 2, rabbinic disputes and halakhic criteria for permissible cheese. Reasons and halakhic criteria. Use of non-kosher rennet. The main issue was the use of non-kosher animal rennet. However, cheese made with vegetable-based rennet was seen differently, as it did not involve non-kosher animal products. The transformative role of rennet. A critical concept in the prohibition is that the rennet acts as a transformative agent, turning the milk into cheese. Okay, this was not so clear, so I wrote this part of it here to try and explain it a little better myself, because we're all familiar with the 1/60th rule. You can put something that's not kosher into a larger container of kosher food, and we can nullify that tiny non-wanted kosher particle if it's 1/60th or less. So why can't we do that with cheese? If the rennet somehow, let's say we're not dealing with pig rennet, we're dealing with an animal, we know it came from a cow. What if the slaughter wasn't done right? Now it's in the nevela. Isn't it 1/60th? Can we just nullify the offending part of it? So I wanted to clarify that for cheese, we can't do that. And the reason why is this transformative role that it plays. So Rambam emphasizes that even though the rennet is used in small quantities, its transformative role makes the cheese non-kosher unless it is from a kosher source. This means we cannot nullify the unwanted non-kosher substance, even if it is less than 1/60th of the total product, if that ingredient is required to make the product. So because that ingredient is required to make the product, this makes it different from some other product that gets dropped into your product. So here's how I explain it. Imagine some non-kosher ink. Can we use that to write a Torah scroll? Even though when you take the whole Torah scroll with the wooden handles and all the parchment, the ink is less than 1/60th of the total scroll. The ink is a requirement because without the ink, you have just a blank scroll. If you remove the ink, then you no longer have a Torah scroll. So for that reason, it is essential in transforming it into what it is. So this essential transformative role is why it's an exception to the 1/60th rule. that normally allows us to nullify a tiny amount of unwanted non-kosher particle. So normally if a tiny kosher particle falls into a pot of kosher soup, you still have kosher soup. Once you remove or nullify that particle, because that unwanted particle doesn't turn the soup into a soup the way rennet turns milk into cheese. Does that make it clear enough for people who are reading this for the first time and are not familiar with the 1/60th rule and why this doesn't apply?
Mm.
Looks like nobody's in the group here. I mean, is that explained well, or do I need to go back and add more, would you say?
Makes sense.
About to say I'll take silence as agreement. There's actually a
Sorry.
statement in the Talmud that says silence is agreement. If you don't stand up and object to what you see, that means in some way you agree with what you're seeing. So I can use that going forward.
What you say.
All right. So possible leniencies and discussions in the Gemara. So this is where it'll start to get interesting. So the Gemara discusses the potential leniencies if the cheese is made using non-animal-based curdling agents under the supervision of a Jew, implying that it might be permissible. However, traditional practice has generally maintained a level of stringencies. Okay, so non-animal-based curdling agents. That means it's veggie rennet. So it doesn't matter if it's a non-kosher animal. It doesn't matter if it's a cow that wasn't slaughtered properly. It's no longer part of the ingredient if you're using vegetable rennet. So what's the problem? Traditional practice, which means we're discussing minhagim, has generally maintained a level of stringency. Stringency means humra, optional stringency. Government supervision and commercial production. In modern contexts where cheese production is closely regulated, some authorities argue that the oversight eliminates the concern for non-kosher mixing. However, this point is subject to extensive debate, like everything, particularly between Ashkenazi and Sephardic authorities. Okay, the fact that we're debating between Ashkenazi and Sephardi means, again, we're talking about minhagim. If the halacha said this is not allowed, then it's not allowed for one of you and allowed for the other one. It's not allowed for anybody if it's against halacha. You can't say, well, we're not allowed to do the 39 melachos because we're Sephardic. White people, they're Ashkenazi. They do whatever they want on Shabbat. It doesn't work that way. The halacha means it's prohibited for everybody. Minhagim is, all right, well, we can do it because that's our minhag. We don't do it because that's our minhag. So that's another clue when you're looking at debates between Ashkenazim and Sephardim. You're discussing minhag here. What else was I going to say? Oh, no, we'll leave it out. I was going to say, should I add minhag and humra here? But we'll leave that out. I'm going to get a little critical at the end here. I added a few things. Okay, government supervision. That's what I just read. Okay, section 3. The Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah, and their diverging views on Gavinat Akum. Okay, this means there's not a consensus. There's different opinions, which means you can poskin on either one that you like. The Shulchan Aruch's strict approach. The Shulchan Aruch, authored by Rabbi Yosef Karo, is very stringent about Gavinat Akum, prohibiting all cheese produced by non-Jews, regardless of whether it contains animal rennet or not. This view is based on the general concern that all cheese made by non-Jews could potentially contain non-kosher elements. So what do? Do we say now that in modern times we don't have this concern anymore? Or do we say we go by the Shulchan Aruch? Well, what does the Ramah say? The Ramah, he wrote a gloss to the Shulchan Aruch. Did he go by the Shulchan Aruch or does he disagree with it? The Ramah's leniencies and Ashkenazi customs. The Ramah, in his gloss to the Shulchan Aruch, provides a more lenient approach, primarily followed by Ashkenazi communities. He permits cheese if it's made in a place where there is a strong presumption that no non-kosher rennet is used, or where there is government oversight ensuring the use of kosher ingredients. The Ramah also raises the idea that if a Jew has the potential to oversee the cheese making process, the fear of using non-kosher ingredients is minimized. And he gets this from the Rambam on the topic of Halav Israel. If a guy goes into a barn, there's a camel and a cow there, and he comes out, you assume he gave you the kosher milk. As long as the barn was open, you could see he could have potentially walked in there and caught him milking the camel. We make the assumption he's not going to do that, as long as it's possible for someone to see it. So today, government, if you're in business with food, the health department has access to come in unannounced and inspect. So that fear is present. So this is what the Ramah is using here. Okay, Tosafot and the Rishonim's perspectives. Tosafot, these are the students of Rashi. Among other Rishonim, introduced the concept of fear, where the presence or potential presence of a Jew overseeing the cheese-making process deters non-Jews from using non-kosher substances. This fear is enough to permit the cheese, even if a Jew is not constantly supervising. Okay, so these are the Ashkenazi sources for the leniency that Rambam gave us. Section 4, Gavinat Akum in modern times, practical concerns and diverse opinions. Vegetable rennet and microbial enzymes, a halakhic debate. With advancements in cheese-making technology, many cheeses today use microbial or vegetable-based rennet instead of animal-based rennet. This shift raises the question of whether these cheeses still fall under the prohibition of Gavinat Akum. Some poskim permit vegetable rennet. Certain halakhic authorities argue that since the original prohibition was based on the use of animal rennet, cheese made with vegetable or microbial rennet is not subject to the same restrictions. Differentiating between hard and soft cheeses. Okay, this here, you already know my conclusion. I'm not concerned about cheese. Yonatan Halevi even gives one example. I think it was ricotta cheese. He's like, I'm not an expert in cheese, whatever. But there are some people who make a distinction. Fine for them. Again, you already know my conclusion, so I'm not concerned about their conclusion, whatever their outcome is, because you already know how I roll with cheese. But because some people do make a distinction, we included it here. So hard cheese, aged hard cheeses such as Parmesan or cheddar, which undergo a significant aging and curdling process, are treated more stringently within the framework of Gavinat Akum. This is due to the central role of rennet in their production. Soft cheeses, fresh soft cheeses like cottage cheese, cream cheese, and ricotta are often considered less problematic since their production may not involve traditional rennet, or the curdling agent is not as integral to the cheese's formation. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein is known for permitting soft cheeses, especially if they are not heavily dependent on animal-based rennet. So there's the source if you want to poskin like him. Supervision practices in kosher certification. Use of closed circuit cameras for supervision. A modern halakhic solution is a use of technology such as closed circuit cameras to ensure proper supervision of cheese making process, allowing kosher certification with a constant physical presence. This provides the fear that if someone's doing something they're not supposed to do, they could get caught. Somebody could be watching, even if they're not there 24/7, supervising it. So this is a sort of a debatable thing because it's new. Well, should we permit this? Government regulations. In regions where dairy production is closely regulated, some authorities argue that government supervision is equivalent to kosher supervision. However, this leniency is controversial, and many communities prefer stricter standards. You could prefer to be as strict as you want. Doesn't mean, somebody else is violating halakha if they choose to not prefer the stricter standards, which is why people are allowed to come to the conclusion that people like Chaim Ovadia does. Okay, Section 5, Sephardic and Ashkenazi practices. Okay, here I think is where I want to bring up. Yeah, probably. Okay. So Yonatan Halevi, if you've gone through the first 6 sections of this, you're probably in love with him because he provides all the sources you need to make life as easy as possible. You don't have to feel guilty because I didn't comply with this chumrah. I learned that this is not actually halacha. We're allowed to do this. So when you get to this section, as you know, he's Sephardic. And so he makes the statement in there, you can't be Sephardic when it's convenient. Here, you have to be Sephardic also when it's inconvenient. That's his level of commitment to the tradition. I have encountered people, and they'll give you this, what I call faulty logic. They'll say, okay, when it comes to minhagim, you have to follow your rabbi. Because if you don't, if you disagree with your rabbi and you pick and choose some other minhag to go by, then now you're creating a new tradition, a new religion, some of them have called it. So you have to follow everything that your rabbi does. So what they're saying is if you're, I don't know, let's say you're following the Sephardic traditions and you agree with your rabbi on all 10 of these items or 9 of these 10 items, but there's one that you disagree with him on. You want to say good Shabbos, which is an Ashkenazi way of saying Shabbat Shalom. You can't, because you'll be raising your children to do all these Sephardic things, just like your rabbi. That's the Mazorah that you're getting. But now you're changing one of them. You're creating a new Mazorah to give over to your children. So if you don't want to say Shabbat Shalom, if you want to say good Shabbos, then you can switch to an Ashkenazi minhag, but you have to follow all of their minhagim. Meaning you have to leave your Sephardic shul, you have to find an Ashkenazi rabbi that says good Shabbos, and you can't maintain the other 9 minhagim that you were following with your previous rabbi. Now you have to adopt all 10 of these items that your new Ashkenazi rabbi does. Because if you disagree with one of them, then you're creating some new Mazorah to teach. And there are people that believe this with all their heart and soul. I completely disagree with that, but Yonatan Halevi on this topic says, if you want to paskin like the Tosafot, if you want to be Sephardic and have this Ashkenazi tradition of eating this cheese, then you have a lot more cheese available to you. But for him, he's committed to the Sephardic minhagim, so he does not permit a lot of types of cheeses. The fact that he tells you you could paskin like them, even though it's not what he does, that's sort of an admission that we're dealing with minhagim here. I am here to tell you, even if you agree with Yonatan Halevi's position that you can't go, pick some Ashkenazi tradition, Chaim Ovadia is Sephardic. So you can maintain all the Sephardic traditions in the world. And on this topic, instead of paskening like Yonatan Halevi, you're paskening like Chaim Ovadia. So you are still maintaining a Sephardic tradition. You have not left the Sephardic minhag to bring in some Ashkenazi minhag, which I still think would be permissible. But for those who say there's this distinct difference that you see between Ashkenazim and Sephardim, as you see here, it's making a distinction between the two practices. You can be loyal to the Sephardic traditions, and you're just going with Chaim Ovadia instead of Yonatan Halevi. People do that all the time. Okay, so anyway, this section talks about the different practices. So community customs and applications. Sephardic stringency and Halav Israel. Many Sephardic communities, although not all, adhere strictly to the prohibition of Gavinat Akum and maintain a strong preference for Halav Israel, milk supervised by a Jew, regardless of the production method of cheese. Now, this says many Sephardic do this, but when I hear Halav Israel, I think Chabad, because they seem to be the strictest about it, and they are Ashkenazim. But according to Yonatan Halevi, in general, Sephardic communities are strict when it comes to this, including himself. But because we're dealing with minhag, it doesn't have to be that way. You could go against Chabad, even as an Ashkenazim, and say, you know what, milk is kosher, even if it's not Chalav Israel. And you could do what I just said, with regards to Yonatan Halevi. You could be lenient on it like Chaim Avadia, because it is, at the end of the day, just minhag. Ashkenazi leniencies in commercial cheese. Ashkenazi communities, while traditionally stringent, have developed leniencies, particularly in diaspora settings. For example, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein allows consuming commercial cheeses under certain conditions, given the high level of government oversight in their production. Halakhic solutions for cross-community standards. Kosher certification agencies have developed methods to balance both the stringency of Sephardic traditions and the leniency of Ashkenazi customs by ensuring that kosher cheeses meet both high standards of kashrut and practical considerations. These agencies facilitate the consumption of cheese for Jews from diverse communities. Okay, so I kind of deviated here to give you my explanation on this part about Sephardic communities being more strict. As a new person reading this, between these two paragraphs, would you come away with the impression that if you're following Sephardic tradition, you're not allowed to have it? Only Ashkenazim give you leniencies? Or would you have the impression that there's a way, no matter what, to permit it? What do you
I
guys think?
think it comes across. Not trying to be wishy-washy. I think initially, for if you were to go into it with fresh eyes, it would maybe initially seem that. But I think if going into the explanation, I guess if they hear the video or if they see a video, with it, or if it's in there, to follow up, you could extrapolate and come up with the conclusion that you could adjust that they're a bit less stringent. However, it's funny that you asked that, because I was going to say, I hear a lot that Sephardim is way more stringent across the board than the Ashkenazim. So I don't know. What is that? I guess it would depend on where you are and how much you want to delve into it, I guess.
So keep this in mind, and because I don't remember what's at the end of this. So if we don't come away with the conclusion at the end of this that you can follow Sephardic tradition and still have whatever cheese you want, then we'll come back to this section and we'll put that at the end here.
Okay.
But I'll forget, so don't let me forget.
Okay.
Halakhic solutions for cross-community standards. Kosher certification agencies have developed methods to balance both the stringency of Sephardic traditions and the leniency of Ashkenazi customs by ensuring that kosher cheese meets both the high standards of kashrut and practical considerations. These agencies facilitate the consumption of cheese for Jews from diverse communities. Section 6. The intersection of halakha, tradition, and Kabbalistic influence. Okay. This is where I got a little tough on them, and I even started typing something a little stern, and then I deleted it. I said, I'll run it past you guys and think if I should add it in there or not. The intersection of halakha, tradition, and Kabbalistic influence. Kabbalistic perspectives of non-Jewish cheese. Kabbalistic authorities add another layer to the discussion of Gavinat Akum, considering the spiritual implications of consuming foods not produced by Jews. For instance, the Lubavitcher Rebbe emphasizes the spiritual purity associated with Chalav Israel, asserting that consuming cheese made by non-Jews can negatively impact one's faith and spiritual sensitivity. This is not my view, and I oppose such teachings. So I think I left it there rather than going into attack mode and saying why, why this is problematic. Because like the purpose to fulfill a mitzvah, any mitzvah, is to connect to Hashem. If you're not going to connect to Hashem, what's the purpose of doing it? Like we talked about the cow. The meat of the cow is the same meat, no matter what happens to it. It's whether you can fulfill the mitzvah, comply with the mitzvot or not. That's what gives it the holiness. Like a string is a string. No matter who ties the string, what turns that string into tzitzit and gives its holiness is the Jew complying with the mitzvah for the purpose of fulfilling mitzvot. That's what gives that string holiness. Without that, it's just a string. My string is not better than anybody else's string. It's the same material. So to say that this kosher milk has a negative impact on one's faith and spiritual sensitivity because you didn't take this kosher milk and turn it into Halav Israel, you made this milk somehow more special. And, cheese, which when the Haimavadi is 100% kosher, somehow has a negative impact on your faith and spirituality. I think that's problematic. But I didn't want to go into all of that. I mean, we're trying to just teach the deal with cheese here to new people coming to convert or who have already converted. So I didn't want to go in attack mode.
You could cite, I mean, and I don't know if you've got this planned within the context, but you could cite resource, like source material, just to cite that. And then, like you said, that is not of your belief. But, clearly you made that your opinion with an educated background of why you said that. You could put some, and that way, if they wanted to research it or if it came up, then it could be expounded upon later. If that's, something to back up, what you said, if you wanted to. Alex, I didn't know if you had planned on adding source material with it.
Yeah, I'm trying to avoid negativity here. And if this is somebody that's intending to go to Chabad, I just kind of left it here. This is not my view, and I oppose these teachings. Why?
There you go.
You can look it up and see what you
There
come
you
up.
go.
I think that's best there. Okay, balancing Kabbalah and Halakha. This is where I might have left out what I wanted to say. I don't remember. While Kabbalistic traditions call for stricter observance, some authorities argue that these perspectives should not overrule halakhic leniencies when the cheese is made with kosher ingredients. This balancing act highlights the ongoing dialogue between traditional law and spiritual practice in kashrut observance. We all know, or should know, halakha trumps Kabbalah. If you like something in the Kabbalah and it does not conflict with halakha, then fine. You can say, Negel Vesser, for example, why do you wash your hands in the morning? Well, halakhically, because you have to have clean hands when you come to daven, when you're going to eat, when you're going to do these things. So the halakha is that you wash your hands. If you like the Kabbalah and say there's evil spirits on my fingers and that's why I wash my hands, okay, but that's not contradicting halakha. Now, when there comes a debate, what do? Do we follow the halakha or do we follow the Kabbalah? You follow halakha. You don't get halakha from Kabbalah. Halakha comes first. So if you're someone who's converting and going to Chabad, you might not hear that because you're going to hear a lot of Kabbalistic things there, but legally that's the way it works. So if you like, complying with this Halav Israel and cheese, and that helps you connect to Hashem, and you understand that's optional and you find value in doing it for those reasons, fine. Far be it for me to tell you to stop, but do not elevate it above halakha. In minhag and halakhic tradition, the adherence to community customs, minhag, is crucial in the application of gavinat akum. While some communities maintain strict observance out of tradition, others adapt to modern realities, focusing on fundamental halakhic principles rather than additional stringencies. Additional stringencies. This is a humrot of the month club. If that's what you want to do, that's fine. but the requirement is the halakhic principles, which is what we go by, halakha. And that's why there's a difference in halakha and minhag. I think you all understand that. I'm just trying to think about the new readers. A conclusion and reflection. The halakhic complexities of Gavinat Akum reflect the broader values of Jewish kashrut in maintaining purity, distinctiveness, and spiritual integrity. The nuances of cheese production, supervision, and the evolving nature of food technology continue to shape how Jewish communities apply these laws today. And then discussion questions. Okay, and I guess this is good. I think I kind of like this. I forgot what I was gonna. Last night when I was looking at this, I went and started typing up something that was kind of aggressive, and that's when I backed it out. But now I'll talk to you about it. See if I should put it in there. Now I don't even remember what it was. And reading this last part didn't trigger the memory. So I'm looking at it now, and I think this is good. Because if you are going into a community, you're not going to say, well, I read this. And, I mean, you're going to do what they're doing when you're around them. So I don't really want to beat up somebody's minhag too bad. So I guess this is good. And then wherever they're going, they can ask for further whatever questions they have to get whatever answers they're going to get. And then you're not going to, beat the rabbi out and say, well, actually, I know more on this topic than you do. Who's going to do that if they're joining a community? So how do halakhic rulings on Gavinat Akum reflect the balance between stringency and leniency, ensuring kosher standards? Basically, you're just going to monkey see, monkey do whatever your community is doing. However, if you know more on this topic, you can come to the same conclusions we do. And by the way, there's different levels. I mean, obviously, Yonatan Halevi is far more knowledgeable than me, and he maintains that a lot of this is off limits to him. Avadia says it's pretty much all allowed. And then there's less knowledgeable people. So you can go either way. But then you have less knowledgeable people than all of us that say that just do as your rabbi says crowd, who's never learned any of this information. So it's a broad spectrum, and you can fall anywhere on it. How do community customs influence the approach to kashrut and consumption of cheese across various communities? For any of the reasons mentioned, they could pick why that influences them. What challenges arise in upholding traditional kashrut standards in modern food production, and how are these challenges addressed by halakhic authorities? I would bring up the camera issue. And depending on the reason, remember, we don't know the reason for the prohibition. We speculate many different reasons for the original prohibition, but we don't know the actual reason why they prohibited it. So how are these challenges addressed? It depends on which reason you're picking for the original prohibition. Okay, for more detail, this is the caveat that I put on all of these. See Shaviti for the kashrut lesson 7. This can either be a prerequisite, watching before you read this, or a follow-up to this lesson. Okay, now here on this topic, instead of ending with this, I added this. Valuable additional source on this topic. Rabbi Chaim Avadia at Torah Ve'achava. He has an excellent presentation on YouTube on this topic. It's 2 short videos titled "There is Almost No Such Thing as Non-Kosher Cheese," parts 1 and 2. Highly recommend this in addition to the Shaviti content on this topic. It's more concise and yet somehow seems to be just as thorough in that it not only recaps what you will learn in the Shaviti lesson, but also brings additional valuable sources from the Jerusalem Talmud. So this is probably, I think, where you can get the most information out of all the topics, even though because of the conclusion, I think it's what you need to study the least. However, if anybody challenges you on why you posture this way, for this reason or for that reason, you want to be able to defend what you're doing, it would be good to know this stuff. All right, anything we need to do on this? Oh, did we come to the conclusion? Yeah, I mean, I think if anybody that wants to know, I mean, I think this takes them to Chaim Avadia, which will tell them that it doesn't matter if you're Sephardic. Or should we go back and modify that? What do you think? I kind of think we need to put something in here. This does make it sound strict.
at what juncture do you feel it it needs that transition? At what point of
So
the reading?
I can see that most people, when they get to the end of this, they're probably not going to go watch those videos. Imagine coming to convert and, everyone's got a family and children and jobs. How much time do they really have to learning? Um, they're probably just going to read this and not seek additional sources. So if you're reading this and you come away with the impression that if you're Sephardic, okay, this is why I put this in many Sephardic communities, though I put here, although not all. At here, I'm afraid you're going to come away with, if you're Sephardic, you're not going to be able to have this type of cheese because of Halav Israel. And here we have the leniency. So I think here I want to put like C, the what? Not a, it's not a disclaimer. See the additional source. I don't know, how would I word this? I want to,
But please note that there are additional sources, that could explain blah 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 in more detail. Um, and maybe, and they're gonna, I don't know in what order. I mean, I I guess having, and I don't know at what juncture in this course, but maybe just a brief explanation, like not vocabulary, but gosh, I haven't, like an annex explaining in a nutshell Sephardim, Ashkenaz, and maybe just a brief, that could be something interesting. Just, what could be the differences in a nutshell, because some people, like, I lean more Sephardic, I think, in most things that I do, but clearly I'm surrounded by Ashkenaz. So, but I don't have a whole lot to compare it to either. So some people, if you're coming in, may still be deciding, oh, well, maybe I want to be more Ashkenaz, or maybe I want to be more Sephardim. So I don't know if that made that situation worse for you or not, but it might behoove the cause to have that, described as best, without being too lengthy, what a difference is. And then there again, like you said, you could put in there, please see certain material for further details.
right. There are Sephardic poskim like Rabbi Chaim Ovadia who do not apply these stringencies. That way you at least hear the name here, and at the bottom you'll see his name again.
No.
And then hopefully that'll trigger them to go watch that source. Yeah. Like what you're saying. I'm trying to keep the text short and concise because obviously we could turn this curriculum into a 2-3 year course. We could expand on every single topic. So the goal is to keep it concise to avoid doing that. And I think this is already longer than Asher wants because he said it should be a 24-hour course. 3 classes. Oh no, what did he say? 24 hours, he said. How did he get to that? Eight courses, I think. So 3 hours, a 3 hour class times 8 is 24. Well, this right here is already 8 courses, but it wouldn't be 3 hours. But if you did 1 hour on each topic, that would be 8 hours. So this is already 1/3 of the whole curriculum if he wants it 24 hours. So this is already probably the longest section. So I'm trying to keep it concise, but like you're saying, we are going to have to add something.
I think, yeah, I definitely think having an annex of some kind. I mean, because I mean, there again, that could be something that they could look at and at least, I mean, clearly we're in an age of Google, this, that, and the other, but even if it doesn't go into super duper lengthy, but to have something, this is Sephardim, this is Ashkenaz, this is, just what certain words mean. It doesn't have to be all of them, but just certain things that are, as a new person coming in, that they may not be familiar or as familiar. And like I said, it doesn't have to be lengthy because then, they could, I don't know if this is going to be online or a hard copy or both, but they could, either hyperlink or you type it in and look it up. I mean, that's the beauty of where we're at now in society is,
Yeah,
I don't call it Google anymore. I call it Jugal because everybody talks about Google it as if that's so I say Jugal. So they can Jugal it and,
so
see what's what.
looks like Ariel didn't make it in. I don't think he's here. It just doesn't show me. Are you here, Ariel? Doesn't show everybody. I don't think he's here. I don't see him. So that he did the Shabbat portion. I'm doing the kashrut portion. So we need to figure out what to do next. And I think he's going to do the tefillah. And so I was thinking about doing like a Friday night, putting what you could do on a Friday night service. But if you're joining a community, you're going to do whatever they do. So should I even do that? Because it's like Kabbalat Shabbat is really just a matter of minhagim. I don't know. So I was thinking about, like you're saying, adding something. I was thinking about maybe adding something like, how does halakha function? You know, because I could do like a short chapter on that. And I think that should really be there because, everybody just thinks, even the most knowledgeable people out there, they just think it's whatever your rabbi says. They don't know the
Yeah.
difference between minhagim and halakha. So when you come to these things like Ashkenazim and Sephardim, they're like, well, what do I do? I don't know anything. So I do what they do. But they're not really clear on why they're doing what they're doing. They're just doing what they see their rabbi doing. So maybe that's what I should work on. How does halakha function? And go through the difference of minhagim and halachot. Maybe that's what I can work on after this.
I think it's, in my opinion, and all that, I agree 1,000%. I think coming in, for me, it was an absolute pivotal game changer, understanding and reading Mishnah. So I don't know if that merits, without getting, just even a mention, hey, once you get to here, combine whatever. I mean, understanding. Yeah, I think understanding that, and that's my opinion. Because it was pivotal for me.
Life changing.
It really was. It
almost,
really was.
Almost 2 decades of being Jewish before going through Mishnah Torah. I learned more in 1 year than my entire Jewish existence.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I think it's worth a mention. So, and I don't know, like I said, I don't know how, and like I said again, to fit the criteria and so on. But I do think it would be beneficial as coming in newer to, even if they're like, oh, okay, let me get through this and then I'll start on that or whatever. I think that's and to go back to what you said about Shabbat, and that is true. If they're going to live in a community, I think it would be worth mentioning, tying it in somewhere, the Friday and Saturday. You could nutshell that and be like, hey, you could hit the very basic highlights while explaining this again is going to look very different if you are A, in a community, or B, not in a community. That could be maybe where you could explain, there are options, and if let's say, for example, like for us, if you don't live close enough to a community, but you have an opportunity to go online, right? What does that look like halakhically? What are you going to go up against? What is going to be said? And at what point do you rationally need to make a decision to enhance your faith? I think that's certainly worth talking about, although you encourage community involvement, that's going to look very different in this day and age for the majority of people, quite honestly.
Yeah, we just have to be careful about that because the backlash here. I mean, what you do,
yes,
100% okay with, but what you put in writing for Orthodox Jews that are going to read and criticize. Sure. I don't know if they're ready for the electricity thing.
Right.
Yeah,
well, that's why I say, if you put that in there, that this is, you don't have to say we don't mind whatever, but I mean, to at least put that in there. This is what is said. This is what has been the thing. These are discussions that, you should have with your rabbi or with your community, with your, and then that could be done privately. But yeah. I think to not address it, you don't have to agree or endorse or condone it. But I do feel it should be addressed in a manner that at least gives the person the option to know that they're not like right now, everybody's like, nope, it's not allowed. Nope. And it's like,
we got to educate people on this because the ones doing the educated are not educated on this topic. They can lecture for 3 hours how to wash a pot, to make it kosher, but they don't know how halakha functions. Mind-boggling. So that's what
I
I'm
think
working on.
I think it's worth, yeah, mentioning, to at least be able to, hey, do your research,
I,
and we're not
one of
saying
my
one way or the other, but do your research.
one of my videos I watched because it popped up, and I gave like an hour. I think it was the introduction to the laws of converting to Judaism. It was almost an hour. In the first hour of the video, I just explained how halakha functions. And I said, this is such a great explanation. This should be a chapter in a book. So Yore translated the video for me. So I thought I could just take that text and, put it in here. But when I sat down to do it, I looked at it and it's spoken like I'm talking to you guys, which is what it was, a conversation. That doesn't copy paste so well. You kind of have to change the language and to make it sound like you're writing it in a book. So I was like, once I sat down to do it, even though the explanation was awesome, you almost have to rewrite the whole thing manually anyway. So I guess I'll revisit that, and that's how we'll do the next section. But all right, we got one more chapter to go through, and then that'll be the end of the kashrut series, and this will go faster. Okay, now, like I did I watched that video 7, and both of Chaim Avadia's videos on no non-kosher cheese. And then I read that last night. This one, the last video in the series, it was late, I was tired. I did not watch the video, but I read through this real quick. So, any expanding on all the other information that's given in Yonatan Halevi's video, I don't have fresh on my mind. Obviously, I watched the video a year ago or whenever I went through the series the first time, but I have not watched it since. So, without having in my mind what else is surrounding these topics in that video, I just read this as the text last night, and I thought it was good. So I actually read this as from with the perspective of someone who is going to be like most of the people probably reading this have not seen the video, and I thought it was pretty good. So let's go through this. Lesson titled Gelatin and Jewish Dietary Laws, an in-depth halakhic analysis. Objective: to provide a comprehensive understanding of the halakhic perspectives on the use of gelatin and kashrut, focusing on its production, transformation, and permissibility within Jewish dietary laws. To examine the varying rabbinic opinions on whether gelatin can be considered kosher, analyzing the impact of its transformation through the processing and chemical treatment. For if anyone here doesn't know, you guys are educated, so you probably do know. The issue with gelatin is I guess some of it is made from like pigs. So people won't take like Tylenol gel caps, stuff like that. And they consider it eating like bacon, like the same level of non-kosher as eating a pig itself. Might as well have a pepperoni pizza if you're gonna have this small amount of gelatin. This is how many people feel. So I was surprised to even know that was a thing, because it doesn't really like jump out at you until you hear there's a problem with it. Then you're like, what's the problem? And all you hear is just not kosher, not allowed. But then I found the solution to that in Mishnah Torah. So this is we got something in the chat here. I check makeup too, also soaps. Okay, so there you go. So there are concerns with it. So this is gonna deal with that. Introduction to gelatin, halakhic challenges. The nature and controversy of gelatin. Gelatin, a gelling agent commonly used in foods like yogurt, gummy candies, and marshmallows, is derived primarily from animal bones, typically those from non-kosher animals or animals not slaughtered in accordance with kosher laws. The primary controversy in halakha revolves around whether the extensive processing that gelatin undergoes transforms it to a point where it loses its original non-kosher status. It popped up. Chat. I don't want to spiritually look like a pig. I don't know. I don't know that it would make you look like a pig. I think it's more to do with just the ingredients. But we're gonna. You don't absorb ingest makeup, but I guess this is a valid concern. I don't wear makeup, so that didn't jump out on me. What stood out to me was ingesting it, like eating things with this in it. And that's what I was looking at, where I learned the permissibility of it in Mishnah Torah. Okay, transformation and nullification in halacha. Rabbinic views on gelatin as a new product. One of the pivotal halakhic challenges or principles in determining the permissibility of gelatin is whether its production creates a devar chadash, a new product. Meaning, is it an entirely new creation? If the gelatin is no longer considered bones, but rather a new substance, it might not retain its original kosher status. And I'll tell you, it might come up here. I read it last night while I was tired. I don't remember who said what and when. But Rambam tells us that if something has been processed down to, like when you die, you return to ashes or to dust, then it's no longer what it was. It's now returned to the dirt of the earth. It's no longer the dead body. And to me, that makes sense because, like I think it was Einstein who said that matter cannot be created or destroyed. It just changes the substance. Well, it just changes its form, like from a solid to a liquid to a gas or whatever. Well, if it still has the same halakhic status, then, a dead body is now cremated. It turns into smoke, which goes into the atmosphere, and now you're breathing it in. Are we breathing in dead bodies? At some point, I think it no longer has that status. And this is like when non-kosher animals are used in cooking. If a little bit's in the pot, if it's over 24 hours, it's now rancid. It's no longer considered like the food. It's now, whatever it's returned to, whatever status it goes to at some point after it dies. And if it does give a flavor, it's not going to be good. So you don't have it there because you want the taste of it. So to me, I mean, he brings this down as the way things decompose, and it's going to come up in here. But that's Rambam's position on it, and that's what makes sense to me. And then intent is going to come up too. But transformation and nullification. Like we talked about rennet being part of the transformation process that turns it into cheese. If you remove the rennet, you don't have cheese anymore. Or if it's just an unwanted particle that you can nullify. Rabbinic views on gelatin as a new product. One of the pivotal halakhic principles in determining the permissibility of gelatin is whether its production process creates a devar chadash, meaning an entirely new creation. If the gelatin is no longer considered bones, but rather a new substance, it might not retain its original non-kosher status. Rabbi, I don't know how to say this, the Chazon Ish is how he's commonly known, argues that gelatin is so transformed by its production process that it becomes an entirely new creation. This is what Rambam says, rendering it permissible. The view is based on the idea that gelatin is so chemically altered from its source that it no longer resembles the original bones from which it was derived. There's another rabbi here who offers a rebuttal. He strongly opposes the permissibility of gelatin, stating that the chemical process it undergoes does not change its fundamental nature. He argues that the bones remain essentially the same, albeit in a different form, and thus the gelatin should be viewed as an extension of its original animal source. This is what made me think of the dead bodies, turning into a gaseous state, and then now we're breathing them in. So, dirt is dirt. We return to dirt at some point. It's not dead body mixed in with dirt. They're uncovering all kinds of things, that there's whole civilizations used to live here. We're finding like pyramids in the Amazon rainforest and stuff. So you're saying at some point, if you dig up in a place that hasn't been inhabited for thousands of years, some of this dirt is not dirt, it's actual dead bodies, and it maintains the same status that it once had. I'm not convinced of that, but I guess this is the rebuttal to Rambam's argument. Okay, nullification of non-kosher substances. The concept of a tainted flavor. We know in order to nullify something, there's two metrics that have to be met. The 1/60th rule, we know the exception to that, and if it's imparting flavor. Okay, this, I don't know how to say this the right way because it doesn't have the Hebrew with the Nakud. I'm guessing that would be ta'am, leaf gam. I don't know. I need the Hebrew to make sure I'm pronouncing it right. A principle in kashrut is that if a non-kosher substance imparts a tainted flavor, it may not prohibit the kosher mixture. However, if the flavor is not tainted, or if it is intentionally included, it cannot be nullified even in small amounts. So this is where if it does not impart the flavor, or if it gives a bad flavor, it's unwanted, and it's 1/60th or less, then you can nullify it. So those are the two to keep in mind. Okay, the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch on dryness and nullification. Rambam and the Code of Jewish Law, the Shulchan Aruch discuss the concept of dryness. If bones are completely dried to the point of becoming like dust or wood, they may lose their status as a prohibited substance. The challenge in the case of gelatin is determining whether the chemical drying and pulverizing process is sufficient to render the bones non-food. To me, it just seems like, yes, I've got Rambam to rely on, so that confidently lets me say yes. The rebuttal, I don't find convincing. So to me, the answer is yes. But there are people who will say me and Rambam are not convincing, and this argument that the rebuttal makes more sense to them. So they do what their rabbi tells them to do. The chemical processing and modern realities. Rabbinic consideration of gelatin production. Traditional gelatin production versus modern methods. Historically, gelatin production involved a long process of drying animal bones in the sun, sometimes for up to 2 years. This process significantly dried out the bones, arguably making them no longer considered edible. I would say doing this process or a more modern chemical process is going to be more efficient. It's going to be non-edible. That's just me. However, modern production uses rapid chemical processes that differ greatly from traditional methods. Critics argue that the rapid modern processing might not achieve the same transformation as the traditional drying process. The use of phosphoric acid and chemical agents. The chemicals used in gelatin production are so harsh that they break down the bones into a powdery substance that is fundamentally different from its original form. This raises the question of whether such harsh processing can completely transform the substance to the extent that it is no longer considered non-kosher. I mean, even the most uneducated person about the background, the process, how does this work? I mean, would you think that this is somehow the original status before it got transformed into what it is? It just doesn't seem so to me. But I have a Rishonim to fall back on, so it's not just my gut feeling. I am holding like Rambam. Halakhic debates, nullification and political considerations. The issue of, again, without the Hebrew, I'm assuming this is Mamid, a primary stabilizing agent. One of the concerns in halakha is that gelatin may serve as a mamid or a, what do I have two things here? Or a stabilizing agent that is essential to the final product in ice cream. A mamid, this might not even be Hebrew. This might just be an English word that I've never heard of. That's the nice thing about Hebrew is when you have the letters there and you've got the nakud, it tells you how to pronounce it. In English, if you don't know the word, you have to guess, One of the nice things about Hebrew. Okay, a mamid cannot be nullified in mixtures, even if present in small quantities, because it fundamentally defines the texture and composition of the food. So this is like the exception with the rennet. That's what makes it cheese. So that's why the 1/60th doesn't allow you to nullify it. Rabbi Yosef Shalom I might not say that right either. On the political ramifications. This rabbi takes a political stance, arguing that permitting gelatin could lead to a public perception that rabbis are too lenient or willing to permit anything by manipulating halakha. This perspective emphasizes the potential for misunderstanding within the Jewish community if gelatin is deemed permissible, as it might appear that religious leaders are compromising on kashrut principles. See, this to me, I don't think you're manipulating halakha. If the principle is there, then it's there. So he's arguing that if you permit this permissible thing, then that could lead to a public perception that rabbis are too lenient or willing to permit anything. We're going to permit anything? I mean, there's an example. It's a ridiculous example, but why can't we take a bicycle to shul on Shabbat? They'll say, well, if the bicycle works, what's the problem? But it could potentially, in theory, hypothetically, the chain could pop off and now it's broke, which is not a problem. But then you could then want to fix it. Doesn't mean you would or that you have to. Or you might want to carry the bicycle and now you're carrying on Shabbat instead of just letting it roll, or leave it there, come back later, whatever. So it's like saying if we're going to permit anything, well, then why not just prohibit? Well, we don't permit you to buy to have a bicycle or a car, because if we permit you for having a car, then you might want to also have a bicycle, and then you might want to ride that bicycle, and then that bicycle might break, and then you might want to fix it. How many fences are we going to put around fences that were built as fences around other fences, and we're not even close to what an actual prohibition here? I mean, this is what this seems like to me. I'm not going to permit it because we could lead to a public perception where people will think I'm willing to permit anything. Who thinks we're willing to permit anything today? That's what it seems like to me. I think if anything, we're willing to prohibit anything that we know is permitted, and I see that as a problem. And for anyone listening to this for the first time, it's not just my opinion. It's the same level of prohibition. We can't permit things that are prohibited, like pork. Can't permit it. We also can't prohibit things that are permitted. It's the same level of violation to start telling people they're not allowed to do things that they are allowed to do. That's in Hilchot Mamrim. If anyone's never heard that before and wants the source. Okay, practical halakhic outcomes and community differences. Permissibility based on different rulings. Dried gelatin as a permissible substance. According to certain opinions, gelatin that has been dried and transformed to a state where it is no longer considered food is permissible. For example, the Ramah allows for dried animal organs that are hard as wood to be used in mixtures with milk as long as they are no longer considered meat. There you go. Sephardic versus Ashkenazi practices. The permissibility of gelatin varies significantly between Sephardic and Ashkenazi authorities. Many Sephardic rabbis hold a more lenient view, allowing for the use of gelatin derived from non-kosher sources, as long as it has undergone significant transformation. In contrast, Ashkenazi authorities are generally stricter, particularly in communities where any doubt over the status of gelatin leads to its prohibition. I mean, like we just talked about, in general, Sephardim are more strict on this, but Hamavadi is not, In general, Ashkenazim are lenient on Chalav Israel, but Ashkenazi communities like Chabad is very strict. And that's why I don't really understand this whole divide between Sephardic and Ashkenazi. In general, Ashkenazim don't eat kitniot, but the Rosh is Ashkenazi and permitted kitniot. You know what I mean? You can posket either way on either side. You can find authorities. I don't understand why there's like this line dividing the difference between Ashkenazim and Sephardic. To me, it doesn't make so much sense. Okay, impact on kashrut agencies and modern food production. Diverse standards across kashrut agencies. Some kashrut certification agencies permit the use of gelatin based on its chemical transformation, while others prohibit it entirely. There you go. Some will say it's kosher, some will say it's not. This has led to diverse standards in the kosher food industry, with some products labeled as kosher by one agency, but not by another. So it's either kosher or it's not. Well, it depends on who you ask, I guess. Use in medications and health products. For items such as medications that contain gelatin, many authorities permit their use, especially when the gelatin is encapsulated or not consumed as a food. This reasoning is that the gelatin is not being eaten for its flavor, but as part of a medicinal treatment, including Rambam. He specifically says you can absorb non-kosher substances that we know 100% are not kosher. You can absorb them if it's not being for the purpose of eating it for the flavor of it. So the example that he gives you there in Mishnah Torah is if you have an open wound, I guess they used to rub things like a type of a salve or ointment on it. So if this ointment has non-kosher substance, you're absorbing it through your open wound. But you're not doing it because, oh, I love the taste of bacon and this has bacon in it. You're rubbing it on the wound and absorbing it into your body, even though it's not kosher, because you're trying to heal the wound. The Rambam permits this 100%. So we can extrapolate that to the medicinal purpose of Tylenol gel caps. You're not eating it because you're wanting to eat something, it's not kosher. You're doing it for a medical purpose. You're trying to stop the pain. So you're ingesting a non-kosher substance for the purpose of healing the medical issue that you're dealing with, not because you're enjoying the flavor of something that you're eating. So according to Rambam, this is allowed. But the knee-jerk reaction to many people is gelatin is not allowed, it's not kosher, can't have that Tylenol gel cap. I have to either find a different type of medicine that's not available at the store that I'm at, or I have to suffer in pain. And when you go through the whole theme, including Shabbat, if you're suffering, I did a video, I think I recorded it. I know I taught a whole class on it, are there any limits to a kuach nefesh, saving a life? And you're allowed and even commanded to do things that would otherwise be a violation of Shabbat, even if you don't even think you're going to save a life. And we see this theme extended throughout the entire Mishnah Torah when it comes to medicinal stuff. I mean, we allow people, you're allowed to light a fire on Shabbat. If a pregnant woman if the light from the candle is going to make her feel more comfortable, even if she's blind, even if she's not even going to see the light, if she's going to feel comforted, then we allow you to light a fire on Shabbat. So this theme is all throughout the halakhic literature. So to say no, Rambam's wrong. Poskin now for whoever you want, but Rambam 100% allows it for that reason. So section 5, the political and social dynamics of gelatin kashrut, which I think is the big divide, because halakhically, if you follow Rambam, it's allowed. Rabbinic leadership and public perception. Rabbi Weiss cautioned against permissibility. Some rabbinic leaders like him cautioned against allowing gelatin in kosher products due to concerns over public perception and misunderstanding. Halakhically, Rambam allows it. So now what are we talking about? Marit Ayin, the fear that permitting the gelatin might lead to a slippery slope of further leniencies or misinterpretations of halakhic principles. So now the slippery slope, like I gave about putting a fence around the fence around the fence with the bicycle. So now we have to prohibit things that are halakhically permissible because we don't want them to misunderstand the halakhic principles. How about teach the halakhic principles? We don't want you to not understand halakha and think something that's incorrect, so we'll just prohibit it. Teach the halakha. Nobody should get out of high school without going through Mishnah Torah. You should understand these things, and then you can discuss it. Then knowledgeable people can ask questions, and we can give answers, rather than just say, "Nah, they're too stupid to get this." So we'll just prohibit it and don't question it. It's our minhag. Can't go against the minhag. We said it's prohibited, so it's not allowed. So go on social media and bully anybody that knows halakha and says something different than what you've been told. The minhag is not allowed. You know, I mean, if you do that with any other topic, you would say it's absurd. But then when it comes to teaching Judaism, no, this is what we do, and you can't disagree with that, or you're somehow wrong. How dare you accurately quote halakha verbatim according to Rambam? Now, that's not popular around here, so we don't do that. Okay, conclusion and reflection. This discussion around the kashrut of gelatin reflects a broader halakhic debate over how much transformation is necessary to change the status of a substance and whether modern processing techniques can be equated with traditional methods. The varying rabbinic opinions highlight the complexity of applying ancient dietary laws to modern food production, as well as the need to balance legal considerations with community perceptions. And then there's a disclaimer telling everybody to watch this video by Yonatan Halevi. All right, so this is probably the video in that series that probably covers the most stuff because it talks about a lot of controversies. It's also the one I did not watch recently. So I recommend everybody watch it, even though I didn't. But as a text, I think this is pretty good. All right, so that's all 8 of them. I'm ready to submit this over to Ariel, see if he wants to change anything. I'll probably be good with it. Send it to Asher, who will probably just rubber stamp it and not read it. But I think this is ready to go in the book. Anybody have anything they want to add to it, or are we all good to go with it? All right, I'll take silence as agreement. Then we will forward this and we'll move on with the rest of the curriculum.